Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arsblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Hope you and yours are all doing fine. It's another Friday. That means we've got another week under our belts, and there were some developments in the world of football this week, of course, with the training protocols being agreed on Monday and players returning to training this week, Wednesday and Thursday. The Arsenal players were in, but of course it's not training as we know it. They're training in small groups. They have to arrive in their gear. They're not allowed to have a shower. It's like playing Tuesday night Astro football. You arrive fully kitted out in your gear, and then you get back into your car afterwards, and you drive home and you have a shower there. It's not the way they're used to doing it, because obviously the training facilities at Arsenal and most Premier League clubs are very nice, so you can turn up and you park your car and you wander in the dressing room bench and all that kind of crack, and the showers and the ice baths and all the rest of it. So it is unusual. It is going to be strange for them in this initial period. But the Premier League also carried out testing across the Premier League. 748 tests were carried out. 6 were positive. None of them were at Arsenal, which is a good thing. Dani Ceballos did an interview in Spain. He said the entire squad had tested negative, so that's good. And I suppose we wait for the next step, and the next step is a return to full training, full contact training. But based on what they were saying this week, the Premier League, when they were talking about discussing these matters with the players, they said they hope to have these discussions in the next 7 to 10 days. So it doesn't seem like it's all set in stone yet. They've got to get the final bits and pieces of those put together. But look, we'll chat about that in a minute. We do have a good show for you today. We're going to be talking to Matt Spiro, the France-based journalist who's been on the podcast many times. He's got a brand new book out, so we're going to talk to him about that. A little bit later on, we are talking to a legend of 80s and 90s broadcasting, a person that many of you, if you grew up in the UK, will know very, very well if you're of a certain age. But first, to talk about the few bits and pieces that have been going on this week in terms of football and some of the Premier League discussions that have been taking place, it's Tim Stillman. Hi, Tim.
Hello there.
Let's talk training, because the guys are back, well, sort of anyway. They're turning up in their cars, they're doing their individual sessions, they're socially distancing, they're not allowed to use any of the facilities, etc. But it is a step in, I suppose, the right direction, if the right direction is getting football back.
Yeah, it is. It's quite interesting, really, because even though this is kind of all we've had to talk about, let alone all we've been talking about for a few weeks, it does still kind of seem like it's snuck up on me a little bit. I don't know. Even though like this was kind of roughly the timeline they've been talking about for a long time, I don't know if it just fits in with that thing at the moment I think a lot of us are experiencing, where time is simultaneously going really quickly and really slowly all at the same time. But
yeah.
It feels like not so much that we're getting somewhere, but maybe that we're going somewhere, if that makes sense. Like the first kind of tentative, footsteps, and it sounds like decisions are starting to be made. At the time of recording this afternoon, the EFL, for example, have kind of come up with a bit of a framework for clubs to agree, and it feels like we've got past the stage pretty much where we're listing all of the problems. It sounds like, insofar as we can be aware of the problems at the moment, because new ones will crop up, we've kind of got to the stage where we think, okay, we think we know at this stage what all of the barriers are, so here are some solutions, and we recognise they're not all perfect. But yeah, I actually I listened to quite one of the Ornstein and Chapman podcasts recently, and I never thought I'd say this, but it was very interesting to hear from Sean Dyche. Words I never thought that would come out of my mouth, but he was talking about this return to training, and actually surprisingly he was really sanguine about it, and he was very kind of practical and constructive, and kind of said, yep, we think we can get on with this. We know it's not ideal. And when he was talking about like the phase we're in at the moment, where it's kind of distance training and small groups, he was kind of saying that's generally more or less what the first week of pre-season looks like anyway. Obviously, not with the kind of not showering at the training ground and stuff like that. But he said that the sessions in and of themselves actually are pretty similar. So I kind of think, as much as it feels like we're going somewhere, if not getting somewhere, it does kind of feel like that maybe this is the easy bit. And I'm sure we'll talk about this later as well. But, obviously there are players who don't want to, and barriers like that, and it'll be really interesting to see whether the attitude is like I don't think that's going to stop anything. Basically, I think a bit like when we saw the positive tests in the Bundesliga, and the kind of attitude was, well, okay, that's going to happen, let's just keep getting on with it, let's just keep kind of blundering through, as it were. And I do think that that's going to happen in the Premier League as well. I think that more or less, unless there's an absolutely enormous mutiny, I think they're just going to kind of try and crack on as much as they can.
I mean, the 6 positive tests out of 748 is a fairly low percentage, and certainly not the kind of numbers that would make people say, oh, we can't go on with this. And Arsenal, thankfully, everybody tested has come out negative. It does feel, though, to me, I know we're talking on, what date is it, 21st of May. Originally, the date for the return of the Premier League was earmarked as the 12th of June. We now believe it's going to be the 20th and 19th, 20th of June, revealed to us bizarrely by Danny Ceballos in an interview he did in Spain, where he says they've been told that it's going to be pushed out by a week, but that's obviously the expectation. It just feels, does it feel to you maybe a little bit of a big jump to go from players turning up in their cars, disinfecting footballs, all of that kind of stuff, having to go home, wash their own kits, etc., or have them washed, I should say. I'm pretty sure most of them aren't going to be washing their own kit. They've never had to do that and never will. But, to go from that to like full contact training, where you have to assume that if full contact training is in place, the facilities must be available to them, or should be available to them, because if it's deemed safe for them to have that kind of personal contact, there must be a sort of relaxing of the other restrictions as well.
Yeah, it does. I guess the Premier League would argue it's going to be driven by the testing, so they're going to be tested so regularly, and that I guess kind of notionally at least, the idea is that really they could do full contact training now, but they don't want to do that. They want to take it step by step, but really they want to take the steps very quickly. So I think it does feel fast, but then again, if the testing is there, maybe not quite as much. And it's kind of exactly what they did in Germany as well. They've not been training that long, full contact training in Germany, and they've kind of cracked on with it. Albeit I think they're kind of being driven by finishing everything by June the 30th, so they can at least eliminate the contract issue. I think were that not an issue, they might have waited another couple of weeks, but it certainly feels quick. But actually for me, it's more physically it feels quick to go from kind of training in your garden to distance training, and then in the space of like 4 to 6 weeks playing games. That to me feels quick. That's more punctuated than a pre-season. They've had longer off. Just spoken to a couple of players in the women's team during this time, and they've been saying that obviously you can keep yourself fit, but the kind of the twisting, the turning, the repeat sprints, the kind of bumping into people, you can't replicate that. And actually one of the things a couple of them have said to me as well is actually it's all very well training, but training in terms of like your motivation, when you don't know when your next game is, when you don't know what you're actually training for, is actually really, really difficult psychologically, not having that kind of marker on the calendar. And in the Premier League, we still don't have that at the moment for definite. So at the moment, they're all going into London Colney and they don't know what their next game is, who it's against, where it's going to take place, what time it's going to kick off, etc., because I think the Premier League will take advantage of the no fans thing, and they'll perhaps have some morning kickoffs to suit certain time zones. I see the Premier League being quite savvy like that. So, do
you think they will? Because I thought it was a really great point that Ken Early made in his article in the Irish Times this week about how the reason football matches traditionally and generally are played at the weekend is because people are off work and they're available to go at the weekend. But if football becomes a TV spectacle, if it becomes in essence a television show, because there are no fans to consider, at least when it comes to the stadium experience for X amount of time, or however long it's going to be before we get fans back, it might be something that they look at in terms of when they broadcast games, like when is the maximum audience for a football match. I suppose it's part of why Monday Night Football is a thing, because whatever we might think about it, and I don't like it one little bit, but for your average neutral person who's sitting at home and wondering what to do on a Monday night, if there's a game of football on, then it sort of takes that problem away.
Yeah, so I heard Ken talking about that on Second Captain's podcast, and I think he's exactly right. I think that's why they won't happen Saturday at 3:00. And I think he's quite right. When you think about it, that's kind of the lousiest time for from a TV perspective. So I don't think they'll happen Saturday 3:00. I do think that maybe Saturday 10 a.m. is something you might see, because it kind of works quite well for certain markets in certain time zones. But also, like if you're in England, Saturday morning is kind of I think that's more of a natural time when actually people are probably more geared to sit there and watch a football game compared to Saturday afternoon.
Well, it's assuming it's Saturday. I think the Saturday 10 a.m. thing might work in the UK, but it's not necessarily going to work in the US, where there is, of course, a big audience as well. But, maybe, I don't know, Thursday night, Thursday after, I don't know. It is going to be very interesting to see how they do it.
Yeah. And actually, I'm quite looking forward to that aspect of it. Now I don't have to worry about catching trains and stuff like that. I spent not this Christmas, last Christmas in Brazil, and at Christmas they're 2 hours behind there, and I think we had a home game against Burnley, and it was a 12:30 kickoff, and I watched that in Brazil, and it was 10:30 in the morning.
Oh, nice.
At the height of their summer. And do you know what? It was wonderful, because I sat there with a freezing cold beer at 10:30 in the morning, and the game was over by lunchtime, and I just had the rest of my day to kind of get on with, and actually that's quite appealing.
What do you make of I know these are sort of speculative reports, but the Premier League chairman Richard Masters is on record as talking about having discussions about making the viewing experience better for everyone who's going to have to watch football, because again, there's going to be nobody in the stadiums, and part of what makes football exciting is the crowd noise, the swells and the cheers and the boos and all of that kind of stuff, which we all know and perhaps have taken for granted down the years because we never thought we'd be in this kind of situation. But what would your preference as a viewer be vis-a-vis the idea of, let's say, a soundtrack? So they play a soundtrack of football noise, a low-level crowd noise, and when it gets exciting, the fader for excited crowd noise goes up, and when a shot is missed, it's like, ooh, which, they've got in their library of sounds, and they may do CGI fans or augmented reality to make it look like there are fans in the stadiums. I mean, to me, it just is utterly crazy to even think about doing something like that, but it is obviously something that they're thinking about. So, as a viewer, and, you're somebody who for most of your life, or most of your adult life anyway, has watched football live in the stadiums, coming to this as, a blow-in television fan now, what would you think of that kind of implementation?
So this might be a slightly surprising answer. I don't have a strong opinion on it at all, actually. I don't really mind what they do. I guess I just still find the whole kind of canned laughter, canned crowd noise kind of thing. I just find it difficult to imagine, because I've never heard it before. I've never really seen it done. And there's a big. But so first of all, I don't think it should be the Premier League, or I don't think the Premier League should worry themselves about it. I think they should leave it to the broadcasters, because they probably have the expertise there. And if I were the Premier League, I'd just say, we've got a fucking enough to worry about. Thank you very much. Like, this is your television spectacle. You've bought it. One of the reasons the TV deal is so attractive to the Premier League is because they take all the money and they say, here, do what you want with it. And so I kind of think leave it to the broadcasters. I think it's worth a try. The thing is, if you're going to try it, don't just do it once, because it will take people some time to get used to. And absolutely, hands down, the initial reaction will be, this is crap, this is horrible, do away with it. So I think if you're going to do it, you've kind of got to persevere for 5 or 6 games and see if it takes hold. I think it's worth a try. Personally, I just don't really care that much. I'm kind of fine with the ambience of a behind closed doors game. To be completely honest, I watch a lot of like the WSL, for example, where the crowds are, around 1,000 anyway, and there's not an awful lot of crowd noise. So I kind of think I'm a bit desensitized to it in a way. And actually, it's quite interesting picking up what people are saying in dugouts and people swearing at assistant referees and things like that. That's quite entertaining. But I don't like particularly where Arsenal games are concerned. I really don't care. I really don't care. Just like, don't give me Robbie Savage or Steve McManaman.
That's what you're gonna get. You're definitely gonna get
exactly.
that.
Yeah, like, don't give me those guys. That's what I'll worry about. But the rest of it, not really. If I'm watching a game I'm not as invested in, I'd be quite interested just to see. Sure. Just because I find it difficult to conceptualize.
I wonder, are there sort of on-off buttons for it, or red button things they can do that if you press this button you can get the crowd noise, or you could turn it off if you want. I mean, I've often thought that turning the commentators off would be a brilliant option, which isn't readily available. I suppose the thing is, though, from a just sort of reading the room point of view, if you like, because we're all aware that the world is going through a very difficult period, and I think we have to sort of face up to the reality of that. And if the reality of that is empty football stadiums and players shouting at each other and managers shouting from the sidelines, echoing around the Emirates or Old Trafford or Anfield or whatever it might be, maybe that's what we have to get used to. Maybe that's the right thing to do. And I think as well, for fans who can be in the stadium, for season ticket holders, for members and all those kind of things, to sort of be digitally replaced. I'm not sure that would necessarily sit right with people.
No, possibly not. But at the same time, I think, so what we're talking about here, in essence, we're talking about a lot of things are going to change, and a lot of things that were probably in the post already for football are probably going to be expedited, and actually there's maybe a bit of an opportunity to be creative here, and to do things a little bit differently, and perhaps experiment with things that football has wanted to experiment with but not really found the bandwidth for a little while. But I think the thing for me is that football is competing with other forms of entertainment. And I wonder how much that will factor. I'm talking about like the broadcasters making those decisions about crowd noise and things like that. And yeah, like from my point of view as kind of a hardcore football fan, like I say, I'm not really bothered. I'm quite happy watching and just hearing the net ruffle and all of that. But I guess football is competing now, not, whereas football used to compete with like rugby and cricket, now it's competing with Netflix and Disney Plus, and things like that. And it has to think about those audiences and, how they kind of draw people in. Because like I have to say, when the Bundesliga started up last weekend, I didn't watch a second of it. I really didn't. Well, I think I saw the goals on Twitter. And, I was indoors and I wasn't really doing anything. I was doing a bit of work, but I had stuff on in the background. But I mean, it's extraordinary. I've been like most people, who aren't key workers. Like, I've been housebound for the last 9 weeks with no football to watch. And yet the options available are so vast that even after 9 weeks without football, I felt like I had superior options to watching like a behind closed doors Bundesliga game that I don't really care about. And that's the kind of thing that like there is an appetite for the game to return, but I don't think that football should overestimate that.
No, I agree, which is why I think doing things like artificial atmosphere and those kind of things might be something the broadcasters look at and say, well, this enhances the product from our point of view, but it doesn't really enhance the game, and it's at odds with the reality that we're all experiencing. Just a final question, Tim, with regards to tickets and the issue of what's going to happen for season ticket holders and for members and for, club level members, one of whom was on to me this week talking about how, they'd already paid a 25% deposit on their ticket for next season. We know that some clubs have decided that they will give refunds based on the amount of games left to their season ticket holders. They include Norwich, Everton, Brighton, Leicester, Liverpool, Spurs, Burnley, Manchester United and Manchester City. We're still yet to hear anything from Arsenal. Is that something that bothers you? Are you sort of exercised about that as a season ticket holder? And does, the club's alacrity when it comes to looking for the players to take a wage cut play any part in the thinking that in this particular situation it's dragging out a little bit longer without any real clarity? I know they've said, look, we will address this issue in due course, and I'm sure that it is a very complicated one and a complex one for them to come to terms with in how they deal with it, whether it's refunds, rebates, vouchers, money off the next season ticket, whenever it might be. But it does feel like something that's been kicked down the road a little bit without enough clarity just at this moment in time. Yeah,
I think so, and I think I imagine, and I don't know this, I imagine what Arsenal are looking at is they're looking at options for, well, how can we perhaps offset some of this against the next season ticket, but they don't know what the next season ticket's going to look like yet. One thing is for certain, we are not getting 26 home games next season. That is not going to happen. So whatever happens, we are not getting the usual season ticket. And I imagine they're trying to tie in the options because what they probably are not reluctant, but they probably want to try if they can to avoid a situation where they're just giving 40,000 people money back at the same time, at a time where they're usually taking in lots of money from those people. So, from my own point of view, usually I'm the best. I'm the kind of the guts of £2,000 lighter at this part of the year. This is when we're typically renewing, and like you say, club level season ticket holders have taken some of that pain already. And I think one of the things Arsenal have to be mindful of is there are a lot of people who are in fiscal trouble at the moment, and that will include a lot of season ticket holders who will be very keen to see that money back ASAP. So I imagine that Arsenal were trying to look into options about what next season ticket might look like. For example, I suspect one of the ways that the Premier League might look to rebate the broadcasters is to say, well, look, if all of next season is behind closed doors, why don't we just give you access to every single game? That might be something they explore. Whereas, individual clubs might say, well, hang on, what we'd like to do for our season ticket holders is say to them that we guarantee we will be able to offer them a stream through their membership for every home game or something like that. So I imagine that they've just been waiting to see how things are playing out. But to be honest, I kind of think that time's probably run out on them. And what they should do is just issue the refunds and say, we'll be in touch about season tickets for next season, or at least give people the option and say, well, actually, we can give you your money back now if you want, or what we can do is we can keep it and you can wait to hear what might happen in due course. And I imagine it will be some kind of mixed option like that. So while I've got sympathy with them for, they're going to have to be creative with what, just like we're going to have, the Premier League will have to be creative with what they give to broadcasters. Clubs are going to have to be creative about what they give to their members because they're not getting what they usually get. But I think now, at the very least, they should be approaching people and saying, look, if you really need the refund, we can get it to you now and we can talk to you later about the rest.
All right. Well, look, we'll see. We're overdue an update, I think, on everything, because there are some issues, I suppose, outstanding. They committed to paying casual staff up until the end of May, et cetera, and how that tallies with that staff over the course of a normal summer anyway. If they work or don't work, I don't really know, but it does feel like we are close to getting an update, hopefully, from the club in that regard. Anyway, look, as always, thanks a million, Tim. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure as always.
Thank you very much indeed to Tim. You can find him on Twitter at Stillberto. That is at Stillberto. Read his column every Thursday on Arseblog.com. And of course, Tim is the host of the Arsenal Women Arsecast, which of course is unquestionably the best podcast there is about the Arsenal women's team. There's a new episode of that due imminently, so keep an eye on your podcast feeds. Now, my next guest on the Arsecast is someone we've spoken to a number of times before on the show, particularly when there's something going on in France that we need to know. It's Matt Spiro. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Andrew.
Good to talk to you at last, now that we've sorted out these little connection issues we've been having. But how's it all going with you over there?
Yeah, it's all going very well, thank you, Andrew. It's been obviously a very strange period. I'm enjoying the freedom that we've had in France for the last week, because we don't have to sign these forms now to go down to the boulangerie or whatever. We can actually go out and walk. I've gone back to work a little bit. So, yeah, life sort of, I wouldn't say it's getting back to normal, but I have managed to send my girls back to school for the first time this week. So I had a day of sort of peace and quiet and no homeschooling, which was a relief.
Okay, some elements of normality as we head towards whatever normality is going to be in the future. But we're talking today, not because there's a great deal going on with regard to Arsenal. There isn't, but there is a sort of Arsenal connection in what we're about to talk about. You've written a book called Sacre Bleu, From Zidane to Mbappe, a football journey, which looks at a period in French football which has had some incredible highs and incredible lows. Obviously, France win the World Cup in 1998 and European Championships in 2000. And then there was the mid-20s, 2000s mayhem that went on. And then, of course, France take it full circle, I guess, and win the World Cup in 2018. You start with Kylian Mbappe. Can you explain why?
Yeah, absolutely. Kylian Mbappe is the central thread in the book, partly because he was born in 1998, the year of the first World Cup win, and also, of course, because he starred in 2018, but also because symbolically, as well as what he's done on the football pitch, he has been just absolutely huge and something of a saviour for French football. Everybody saw what he did in the World Cup in 2018, and you have to realise this has come at the end of a period of crisis, really, an extended period of crisis in French football. You sort of alluded to the problems in the 2000s. France reached a World Cup final in 2006. But then it was marred, or that incredible drama with Zinedine Zidane's headbutt. They've had a strike at the World Cup in 2010. There have been all sorts of scandals in more recent years. The quota scandal, when top coaches in France were said to be plotting the introduction of a quota to reduce the black and North African kids being accepted into academies. We've had the Karim Benzema, Mathieu Valbuena sex tape scandal. So it's just been so eventful, some mind-boggling affairs. But the book really looks at everything that's gone on in those 20 years, but also, how Kylian Mbappe has grown up during this time, and how he's been moulded as a man and as a football player, amid this incredible backdrop.
One of the things that sort of runs through the book, you mentioned the quota system there, and I might get you just to explain that in a little more detail in a moment. But just, when France won the World Cup in 1998, it was with a squad with backgrounds from all over the world. There's an element, of course, of the colonial history of France playing a part in that, but it was seen as something which would unite the country because of players from all these diverse backgrounds. But throughout the book, it feels like those are issues which aren't necessarily a positive, if that's the right way, that the idea that what France did in 1998 would sort of pave the way for a new harmonious society isn't necessarily the case. So, can we touch on that a little bit, just sort of maybe going back to 98 when they did win the World Cup with these players, with Zidane, with players from African backgrounds, etc., etc.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 98 is a huge moment, not just because it's the first World Cup win, but they don't have the same sort of cultural history with regard to football in France as they do in England, and it was kind of seen as very, it was frowned upon by the middle and upper classes to like football, and then suddenly it just became popular in 1998, and this team, like you say, they were called the Black Blanc Bleu team, black, white, Arab team, with origins from all over the world. I mean, it was unquestionably a beautiful, historical, wonderful moment, but it didn't have the long-lasting effects that, some people rather perhaps optimistically were hoping it would, because ultimately it's just, it's a football team, it's a World Cup win, but it doesn't change everything that's going on in society. And it all sort of came undone pretty quickly, really. And in 2002, we had Jean-Marie Le Pen, the National Front leader, getting into the second round of the elections. That was soon after France had played Algeria in what was an astonishing night, the first time they played Algeria since the independence of Algeria. And we had thousands and thousands of young kids, mainly of North African descent, invading the pitch. They were 4-0 down, I think, at the time. And it led to sort of, it had a hugely negative impact on the way that people were looking at the immigrant communities in France, and it undoubtedly fed into Jean-Marie Le Pen's hands. But it was interesting. I mean, I've talked to a number of people from that 98 period, and they still have sort of very differing opinions about it. Somebody like Marcel Desailly told me that it was, fantastic, and that we did a wonderful sort of job for the image of immigrants in France. Emmanuel Petit, who I met in Paris as well, said to me, listen, I didn't like it because actually, the guys that I'd been playing football with and growing up with, for me, they weren't black, blanc, bleu. They were just my mates, and I didn't see them as different colours or what have you. And then you've got Liliane Thuram, who, when I actually put to him what Petit had said, he said, but Emmanuel Petit didn't grow up like I did as a black kid in the suburbs being discriminated against. So, it's a huge issue, and French society is a fascinating sort of study on its own, and football quite often reflects the way France is very much sort of divided into two. Because I mean, I've been living in Paris for a very long time, but my world, living in a flat in the middle of Paris is very different to the world of thousands of essentially people from immigrant backgrounds growing up in huge high-rise towers and finding it very difficult to make their way sort of in the professional world.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Robert Pires talking quite openly. I don't know if it must have been early in the 2000s anyway, about the possibility of Jean-Marie Le Pen winning the presidential election and saying, look, this is not, if this happens, I'm not going to play for the French team. We wouldn't take part in the World Cup. And, there was this very virulent opposition to the extreme right. And look, thankfully that didn't happen. But it is a complicated, as you say, a very complicated society with issues that run through it. Let's go back to the quota system and talk a little bit about what exactly that was and what the thinking was behind it from some of the people who put this forward. Because is it in the forward, maybe it's Arsene Wenger who says something like 60% of the players who are professional players in France come from the Paris suburbs. So can you sort of outline, what is that? I mean, I think everybody's sort of heard of, the players who've grown up in the tough Paris suburbs and everything else. And, we've had them at Arsenal down the years. But, what is the reality of that when it comes to these young footballers? And what was the quota system designed or intended to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Paris suburbs remains like a hugely sort of fertile breeding ground, if you like. I think it's certainly the biggest reservoir of footballing talent in Europe. I think Sao Paulo is just above it in terms of supplying Europe and the world with top talent. And look, the quota scandal, it's a complex issue, and some of the quotes that came out from Laurent Blanc and from Blacard, who was the technical director at the time, are deeply shocking quotes, in particular when they're taken in isolation. Laurent Blanc said, this was in 2010, 2011 when Spain were dominating. And he said, when I go to Spain and talk to coaches there, they tell me we don't have any problems. We don't have any black players. Now, you can hear that and think, my goodness me, what a terribly racist man. But I mean, there were two issues that they were discussing. One was dual nationality. There, of course, a lot of these kids who have African parents can play for another nation if they choose to. A lot of them get picked for the state academies, the federal academies, including the one at Clairefontaine in Paris. And a lot of these coaches, including Gérard Houllier, who was the technical director over two spells for a long time, finds it grating, finds it difficult to think that the French taxpayer is paying to sort of create a Senegal team or an Algeria team. And that is the reality of the situation. You could also argue that the top players essentially opt to play for France anyway. So is it really such a big issue? But anyway, there was that. And there was also the football argument. Now, the football argument was that France, after dominating in 98 and 2000, thanks to a wonderful team, of course, Zinedine Zidane was fantastically skillful, but above all, the characteristics of that team was that they were very strong and they were very athletic. We're talking about Marcel Desailly, Liliane Thuram, Emmanuel Petit, Patrick Vieira, and this became the blueprint for French football. That means that this was defined at Clairefontaine, that picking young kids for your academies, we need to be looking at the strongest, the most athletic players. And they went far too far in that direction. And what Laurent Blanc was saying was that the kids that we are picking at the age of 12 are the big, strong ones, and they are basically the black ones. In the Paris suburbs, there is a very high percentage of black population, but I've spoken to coaches at Clairefontaine. André Morel was the technical director for a long time, and he told me he felt that they wanted more white players, fewer black players. But he said to me, "Listen, most of the players are black. Most of the best players are black. I'm doing my job, and it should never be a question of colour or race." And you can totally understand that. So. The problem is these two kind of subjects were mixed. People within the federation clearly felt there was, a racist undercurrent. This big meeting, this famous meeting, was recorded, and the tape wasn't given to the press. It was given in to the chief at the federation at the time, and somehow it did get leaked to the press. So yeah, there are a lot of issues in there, but certainly from 2010 onwards. There was this feeling, because we had also, Andrew, it's a big subject, so sorry for rambling, but
no.
You had players like Antoine Griezmann who were getting turned down because they were too small, and had to, Griezmann moved to Spain when he was 15. Guys like Mathieu Valbuena had no chance of making it in academies. So, there is, I think, a football argument to say, yes, they needed to change the criteria to try to assess a player's footballing ability, footballing intelligence, because there was certainly, I think the French were guilty of having very strong, and I'm not talking about the colour of skin, but very strong athletic players at 13, 14, 15. And then it gets to sort of 18, 19 when the others perhaps grow a little bit more.
Yeah.
They haven't developed their footballing talents as much as they could have.
Yeah, there's sort of an equalisation. Yeah. And look, I mean, I suppose it's worth pointing out that for all the players who went through the French system and maybe opted to play for Algeria or one of the other countries, there are examples of it working the other way around. And the one that strikes me is Patrick Vieira, of course, who's born in Senegal and played for France. So there is a little bit of a quid pro quo, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can give you an Arseblog exclusive from one of the guys I spoke to, Ricardo Fati. Now, he's not become a big star, but Ricardo Fati went to Clairefontaine. He is a big, tall, leggy midfield player with Senegalese origins. And during his youth, he was billed as the next Patrick Vieira, and he was actually successful up until sort of under 20 level. And he went to Roma for talks. I think it was 2007 time. And back in those days, Andrew, you know, when you went abroad, often if you didn't get your international roaming on, your telephone wouldn't work. His phone wasn't working when he was out there. He got back and he'd had 10 missed calls. He'd signed with Roma, and he'd had 10 missed calls from his mum. And Gilles Grimandi had been desperately trying to call her to get hold of Ricardo, saying Arsenal wanted him. And he was absolutely gutted because he told me, I was ready to go to Arsenal and I thought it was all going to be great. But probably, you know, we can add Ricardo Fati to the list of players who might have signed but didn't. But probably, you know, Arsenal, you know, unfortunately for Ricardo, didn't miss too much with him. Yeah,
it sounds quite classically Arsenal, like last minute trying to get in touch with somebody, and then, you know, in the end that they can't do it. I mean, there were, I suppose, other factors in players deciding to go for France, maybe over a home country, the country of their parents, which of course is a big draw. I know, like as an Irishman, but I was born in England. Yeah. You know, I never had to make any kind of choice like that. But I know that if I would have had to, it would have been for Ireland, because I was brought up as Irish, you know, by my Irish parents in England. So that you know, you can see why players go for that. But there's also other elements. There are financial elements and profile elements. Like I think about Declan Rice, you know, who was about to become an Ireland player. But, you know, the reality is, if you're an England international, your earning power and your stature in the game is much higher than if you're an Ireland international, it's fair to say. So there's probably elements of that as well. Yeah,
I mean, that's something, absolutely. That's something I talk about in the book quite a lot, particularly in recent years, because Karim Benzema has been such a sort of focal point of a lot of the polemics, the arguing. I mean, in the last 10 years or so, when France were going through the darker times, there were a lot of sort of people saying these guys don't care about France. They don't sing the national anthem. And that is often something that is pointed at Benzema, even though other players, notably Michel Platini, never used to sing the national anthem. Nobody minded because he was scoring hat-tricks in most games. But so Benzema would never sing the national anthem. When he was 19, Benzema gave an interview on French radio when he said, of course, Algeria is the country of my parents, it's the country of my heart, but I will play for France. You know, and this was a kid who, you know, probably didn't know the career he was going to have. And, you know, this sentence is often sort of fired at him, saying he doesn't care about France and he'd rather play for Algeria. You've more recently had Nabil Fekir, who also has Algerian parents and hesitated for a long time. And there's a journalist in my book who states quite unequivocally that Nabil Fekir decided to play for France because his agent, who is Jean-Pierre Bernès, who is one of the most powerful agents in France, and is also the agent of Didier Deschamps, said, listen, for your career, for your contracts, you've got to play for France, son. And, you know, that put him in this position where he was actually getting booed at the Stade de France when he made his debut. So, you know, from one point of view, you can understand, well, I don't know if you can understand, I mean, I was going to say you can understand fans who think, well, hang on, this guy's only playing for France for money. He'd rather play for Algeria. It certainly, you know, leads to that sort of ill feeling that, you know, the French public fell out of love with the French national team for a long time. And, you know, essentially it's about results more than anything else. Sure. But, you know, this sort of feeling of nationalism, or do these players care about their country, was certainly, you know, a big part of it. And the Benzema Giroud thing sort of rumbles on today.
Sure. I mean, how much of that
and
is...
it's hard.
Go on.
Yeah, sorry, Andrew.
No, continue.
No, I was just going to say I met Olivier Giroud in London, and he's very much aware. There's quite a lot on Giroud in the book, but he's very much aware of the fact that in France he's seen as the man who has taken Karim Benzema's place. And I talked to you about the sort of divided society we have in France. If you go into the suburbs, I spent quite a lot of time in Bondy researching stuff about Mbappe, and I was at the football club quite a lot. And there's one coach there who they call Giroud because he's the only guy in the suburbs who likes Olivier Giroud, apparently. And so they all sort of make fun of him. Everybody else, they're all huge Karim Benzema fans. And Giroud, again, he got a few boos, notably at a game they played in Nantes where there were a lot of players coming in from the suburbs of Nantes who were not happy. But that's not Giroud's fault, of course, that he's being picked. But it's made life hard for him. I was going to ask, how much of, when you talk about the French public falling out of love with the French team, it would be fair to say, from a distance, I'm not, as keen an observer as you are, but, during some of the years when things weren't going as well as they had done, and certainly when things began to go badly, there were characters within that team who were very difficult to like. Players who even some of the French players thought were, a bit above themselves. So I think about Samir Nasri and that incident on the coach, which shocked Thierry Henry, and he fell out with William Gallas, and really I don't have any issue with anyone falling out with William Gallas because he's far from my favorite player of all time. But I remember we did a story, or there was a story that emerged about Nasri. I don't know if it was it? Oh God, it wasn't hand grenades. It was tasers, wasn't it? He was like being lured into a trap by mates of Samir Nasri, and there were players like Ben Arfa as well. Benzema, a fantastic striker for Real Madrid, but like you say, involved in this pretty grotty thing regarding Valbuena and the sex tape and all that kind of stuff. So, the quality of the players and their talent, I don't think necessarily was the issue, but, some of the characters and the way that they comported themselves must have made it hard to get behind. Yeah, no, definitely. I would agree with that. I'd sort of just say that it's probably a generational thing as well, insofar as this generation is very different from Thuram's generation. But I spoke to Thuram quite a lot about that, and he said in his final years he'd sit at the table with Patrick Vieira and talk about this for hours, saying, these guys, they don't realise what they're representing here and how important it is. And he said, I took one of these slightly big-headed youngsters to one side and said, listen, you're going to be a huge part of the French national team in the years to come. You've got to change the way you behave. You've got to start, having a more collective view of things, and nobody can do it. And I said to Thuram, are you talking about Nasri? And he looked at me and said, I'm not telling you. I'm not telling you who I'm talking about. But Nasri features quite a lot in the book. There's a chapter about what they call here La Génération 87, the 87 generation. These are players who were all born in 87, and they won the under-17 Euros in 2004. And earlier in Nasri's career, I spoke to him about that, and he says, for me, greatest memory I've ever had in football playing. And it was basically Nasri, Hatem Ben Arfa, Karim Benzema, and Jeremy Menez, who were all just sensational kids, but all, without wanting to tar them with the same brush, and certainly Benzema's had a wonderful career, but all probably had far too high opinion of themselves, or too much of an individualistic sort of approach to their careers and to their lives. And actually, that 2004 team, it's just an absolute car crash. You've half of them have retired already. You've got, at the time of writing the book, I think Ben Arfa and Menez didn't have clubs. Nasri was in Belgium, and you just think, these guys are early 30s. What the hell happened? And I think you're right. I think there's no question that, and it's also the fact, Andrew, that they had such a wonderful generation before them, and it was hard for them to fill these people's boots and to live up to the standards that had come before them. But the respect just didn't seem to be there. It's amazing to think that a 20-year-old or 19-year-old could get on a bus or come into a restaurant and just not care about whether it's Henry or Thuram or Desailly, these sort of living legends in football. But for them, no, they were already their equal.
I mean, what was the low point in this sort of 20-year period? Was it South Africa, the World Cup in South Africa? I mean, the Raymond Domenech era was not particularly good, and I remember whether it's just an apocryphal story or not, the omission of Robert Pires from the squad because he was the wrong star sign, stuff like that. These sort of side issues or these distractions that went on. I mean, what was the low point, and when did it really start to turn around?
I think no question, the low point was Nice now, which is the town that France was staying in at the 2010 World Cup. It was, it's very much seen as the lowest point in the history of French football, possibly even French sport. Everybody was just utterly ashamed and utterly disgusted, and it's a fascinating story. I think it was several years sort of brewing, really, that story. It was 6 years of Domenech, and it all came to a head at the end. Probably better than most how France qualified for that World Cup, thanks to Thierry's handball at the Stade de France. Yeah. And then Thierry Henry, again, Domenech, I write about this in the book, he didn't want to pick Henry I think Henry had scored 4 goals that season for Barcelona. He couldn't really play as a centre-forward anymore. I mean, he just didn't have the legs that he had before. And Domenech knew that he wouldn't be a first choice, and he decided I wasn't going to pick Thierry Henry, but he had to tell it, it's a huge France legend. He had to tell him to his face, and he kept putting off the trip to Barcelona to speak to Thierry. And then eventually he went, and he came back to France thinking, actually, I've agreed to put him in the squad, haven't I? And Thierry talked him round and said, no, don't worry, I'm happy to be a sub. I'll do. But he wasn't happy to be a sub, and it was just one of a whole sort of number of stories, jealousy issues within that team. And ultimately it shows what happens when there is somebody completely powerless and without any respect left at all at the head of a football team, and that was Raymond Domenech. So when did it start to pick up? Some argue it started to pick up with Laurent Blanc. I mean, he did quite well. Laurent Blanc was manager from 2010 to 2012. He went, I think, 21 games unbeaten in the lead up to Euro 2012. But left a pretty disappointing image in the end, because not only did they go out with a bit of a whimper against Spain in the quarterfinals, but there were a lot of behavioural problems again. And actually, I was an eyewitness to Samir Nasri completely losing the plot with a journalist and trying to pick a fight with him. It was partly the journalist's fault. This was after the game when they were eliminated against Spain. Samir Nasri was sort of walking past what we call the mix zone, where the players go and walk past the journalists and they can talk if they want. Nobody in France was really talking, and this journalist said to Nasri, please, quick word, please, Samir. And Samir just sort of waved him away, and he said casse-toi, which is basically F off. And Nasri heard him and came back and just went completely berserk. And it was just surreal, because he's quite a small chap. I'm not that big, but he was, giving it the big one, saying, come outside and I'll show you, you say I've got no manners, listen to you. And it was just, you just don't expect to see that from a highly paid football player. But I mean, again, the journalist certainly provoked him at a time where he was feeling pretty low. Yeah. So things improved with Blanc, but no, unquestionably Didier Deschamps has done a phenomenal job. Took a bit of time to get going. They lost 2-0, didn't they, away to Ukraine in the World Cup playoff 2014, and then the night it all definitively turned around was when they won 3-0 at the Stade de France, qualified, and it did feel like something had happened that night. There were incredible scenes, and they kicked on from there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we remember the World Cup win in 2018 and 2016 in the final of the European Championships, which they probably should have won that game and should have won that tournament.
Yeah, they should have. And actually, it was a brilliant tournament. I was lucky enough to be working, reporting in different cities. The tournament was obviously hosted by France, and it came at a really difficult time, because the terrorist attacks had hit France in November 2015, and there was huge sorrow obviously in the city, but also huge concern that the next sort of target was going to be a Euro 2016 fan park or stadium. I remember doing interviews in the build-up and just sort of talking to fans about how worried they were, and it was just that once the football started and everything was okay. Well, I say everything apart from the Russian hooligans against England. the atmosphere was just absolutely wonderful throughout the country, and thanks in no small part to your compatriots, Andrew. The Irish were in great form, but France. The big game for them was Germany in the semi-finals down in Marseille. An incredible night, one of the most memorable that I've seen with Les Bleus. It's a wonderful stadium, the Stade Velodrome, real sort of football people down there as well. And Giroud was very interesting and very strong, talking to me about just how important the fans were that night. Germany were better than France, I think, that night. But they got a couple of breaks. They got a penalty. Griezmann got a second goal, and they just defended for their lives. And that was sort of their final. And like you say, they should have beaten Portugal, but I think they only had 3 days to prepare for it. And there was, I don't know. Didier Deschamps said that he learned an awful lot in terms of how to prepare a final, and that helped him 2 years later. I think the atmosphere was strange as well at the Stade de France. It was nothing like it was down in Marseille. And people just sort of expected France to win, and actually Portugal defended really well, had a bit of luck, and
the rest is history. Well, look, I mean, a lot has happened in 20 years, and we've skimmed over some of the key bits here, but it's in great detail in the book, which is called Sacre Bleu, From Zidane to Mbappe, A Football Journey. For those listening, we've got some copies of the book to give away, so stay tuned for a competition question on that. But before I let you go, I just want to ask about what's happening football-wise in France. It was a couple of weeks ago now since it was announced that no sporting events would be taking place until September at the earliest, and they called time on Ligue 1. How have the decisions gone down in terms of, obviously PSG have been made champions, but relegation, promotion, those kind of things? We've heard talk of legal issues. What exactly is going on? And, is there a lot sort of bubbling under as we're all very focused on the Premier League and its return? What's the feeling in France about the way the season has ended?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion. There still is a lot of discussion. Lyon have filed all sorts of complaints. Jean-Michel Aulas, the Lyon president, is taking legal action on various fronts. He is so unhappy, basically, because Lyon was seventh in the league, and for the first time in 24 years, they're not going to be in Europe next season unless they win the Champions League, if we have the Champions League. The other club that was very, very upset, and I'd say probably more understandably so, were Amiens. Amiens was second from bottom. Only the bottom two go down automatically in France. Toulouse were bottom and had been absolutely abysmal all season. They were way behind. So while they're obviously not very happy, they can't have too much to grumble about. But Amiens were just 4 points from safety. They've been showing quite a bit of fight recently. And they've been, likewise, they've been getting legal advice, getting all sorts of petitions. They've got some influential people on their side, including Laurent Blanc, who is arguing that we should start next season with 22 teams in the top flight. But no, the decisions have been made. I'd say the criticism, if you like, was that they were made so quickly. The government announced, I think on April the 29th, that there'd be no sports with more than 500 people, I think, or no sport with spectators before September. And then within 24 hours, the French League had a meeting and had called everything off. So the more people are kind of looking at Germany and perhaps England if they restart, I think the more questions there will be about why on earth did we stop it so quickly. I think the main reason is financial, as with all, of course it is due to the crisis, but I don't think it's a coincidence that in France there is a huge new television deal starting at the beginning of next season, so starting from August. And I think there's big concern, or there was big concern among the league, that if they said, we're going to try and finish this season and maybe start the new one in January if we have to or something, if Media Pro, who are the new broadcasters coming in, if they pull out, it's over €1 billion, this deal, first time it's gone that high. If they pulled out, French football would be in huge trouble.
Right.
So I think that's the key.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was going to ask you why, because obviously France, Italy and Spain were also very heavily affected by the coronavirus crisis. But, there seems to be a willingness in Spain and Italy to restart the leagues and to finish off. So, well, you've pretty much explained why there. So we'll wait
well, I think
so.
But it's not clear cut, and there is still a huge amount of debate. And Jean-Michel Aulas, he's a divisive figure that a lot of people get fed up with very quickly, but he is fighting every day. He's got new arguments, and he still thinks that there is a chance that we can get the decision reversed. I don't think that for a minute. But nothing is definitive yet. In my work, I've had to do the review show of the season, and I'm sort of dreading they're going to say, well, actually, we're going to start the season again, because I worked bloody hard to do that show.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that that's going to be the case, but, certainly it always struck me that if a particular league made decisions based on, what had happened during the season, every team who's negatively impacted could probably have a good case to say, well, look, it wouldn't be impossible for us to escape relegation, or it wouldn't be, impossible for us to reach the European places, and the can of worms that it opens or would have opened would be massive. So we'll wait and see what happens in France. But look, Matt, good luck with the book. It's out next week, and we will have a link for people to use as well if they want to go and pre-order it, and we'll have some copies to give away. And look, hopefully we can chat again soon.
Thank you very much for having me on, Andrew. Thanks.
Matt is on Twitter at Matt Spiro, and if you would like to get your hands on a copy of his book, we have got some to give away in a competition. There are 6 in total to give away, so your chances of winning are higher than they would be if we had fewer copies to give away, which seems fairly obvious. But look, here's an easy question for you. Given that the book spans the year from 1998 to 2018, tell me this. Which Arsenal player scored France's 3rd goal in the 1998 World Cup final? Pretty easy. All you got to do is email your answer to competition@arsblog.com. That is competition@arsblog.com, and I will announce the winners on next week's show. Right, now on the Arsecast, I'm delighted to welcome somebody who was a fixture on the radio and television across Britain throughout the 1980s and 90s. He worked for BBC Radio 1, presented Top of the Pops. He worked for Capital Radio, amongst many others. He also presented a long-running TV show called Funhouse, as well as lots of other TV work. And he's still doing lots, as we'll find out. It's a pleasure to welcome to the show Pat Sharp. Hello, Pat.
Well, hi, Andrew. Thank you for that very nice intro. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I did my best. I will explain to you the first time, because I'm Irish and I live in Dublin. I don't didn't have the same sort of exposure to you as people might have in the UK, listening to radio, etc. And the first time I ever saw you do anything was, I think, the mid to late 80s, and on the cable TV system in Ireland. All of a sudden,
Sky Channel, yeah?
Yeah, we got Sky. We got Sky MTV music thing.
Music box and everything else. So, so I was on Sky Channel, which was the forerunner to the Sky TV that everybody knows these days.
Yeah.
And it was still owned by Rupert Murdoch then, and we were bashing out a ton of pop videos because it was cheap telly, and I was on there with Tony Blackburn and Gary Davis and Kid Jensen and a lot of the Radio 1 DJs where I was working at the time. So, it was good times.
There was a show in particular where people would request a video and they had to ring up, and then there was a poor guy called Ronnie who had to run from one building to another to try and unearth the video in the video library archive, etc., which was a strange kind of concept. But
it's funny. It's funny, Andrew, how many people remember that show in Ireland, because it was really big in Ireland. I mean, we were huge in Norway and Denmark and Sweden and 38 different countries all over the shop. But Ireland really embraced it, and it was just known as the Great Video Race with Ronnie the Runner.
Ronnie the Runner, that's it, yeah.
Yeah, and people would literally send a photograph of them in by post. It would arrive in the UK in our London studio, and then we would phone them up and we would put their picture on the screen, and they would shout down the phone whilst Ronnie ran to get their video, and they would just go, "Run, Ronnie, run, Ronnie, run, Ronnie." run, because often they were from Belgium or somewhere and didn't know much else in English. And it was always quite interesting, because after they'd said "Run, Ronnie, run" about 40 times, they just went, still not got it.
Well, it's that thing as well, when you say the same word over and over, it starts to lose any meaning. You sort of wonder if if you've made a fool of yourself just repeating the same thing over and over. Whatever happened to that guy?
Well, he was actually the actual runner. So he did work for Skytrax, which was the pop music video shows that we were making back in the day. And it was his job to basically run and get someone a cup of coffee or take a script over to the other building on the other side of the road. So eventually they said, hey, why don't we put him on as Ronnie the Runner? Because he runs and his name's Ronnie. Stick him on and he can become famous. But he never spoke, because apparently if he ever spoke or said anything, they'd have to pay him a presenter's fee, which they didn't want to do.
Okay. The cutthroat industry of broadcasting and what have you. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, he had his moment of fame, I'm sure, and he's well remembered by many people across the world for basically just running to get pop music videos. Let's go back a bit though and talk about how you began your broadcasting career. Why were you interested in radio? What was it about radio that dragged you in? Because I've spoken to a number of radio people for the podcast, and there's this common theme that there's a bug, and once you're sort of bitten by this bug, you've got it for the rest of your life. So was it something that you wanted to do from an early age?
It's definitely true about the bug, Andrew, and certainly from an early age as well. I would take time off school by sticking a thermometer underneath a hot water bottle when I cried wolf in the morning and told Mum I didn't feel well, and she'd bring me up a hot water bottle, and then she'd say, right, I'll just take your temperature, and she'd go out of the room and I'd stick the thermometer under the hot water bottle for about 30 seconds. When she came back, she went, oh my God, you can't go to school forever.
You should be dead.
Yes, exactly. So I listened to the radio under the covers, basically, and used to, listen to how the jocks were doing things. And then from there, I got a cassette radio where I was able to fade down the songs with a little button at the top and do my own introduction into the cassette radio microphone, so I could become the DJ and then play it back and record it onto a cassette. So I did have the bug at an early age, and it does never leave you. So you're absolutely right. I've been doing it for 36 years or something like that now. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that, and I think obviously a love and appreciation of music is part of it as well, because you can want to be a radio presenter but not necessarily be a music presenter. So, that was another element to it, I guess, that sort of listening to, there was something magical, I think, about, music on the radio back then and the voices out of the radio back then, because you had more of a mental image, didn't you? You could create your own mental image of, who the guy was, who the DJ was. Nowadays, of course, we see pictures and we see videos and everything else online, but, you could have your own image of what the radio presenter looked like, and you could make him as cool as you wanted him to be.
Absolutely, and there were a number of DJs, of course, who were very famous, and people knew what they did look like because they turned up in your living room every Thursday night hosting Top of the Pops. If you look at the Radio 1 guys, they were the rock stars of their day. And I was on the radio. I still am to this day. I mean, I've just worked out it's 38 years, not 36. So there you go. Okay. Time flies when you're having fun. But I was on the radio when these guys were really, really well known and became part of a fixture where people say to me today, I got into radio because of you, and I listened to you under the covers and stuff like that. So it all moves on. But I don't think that the guys who are those guys who've now got on the radio today, I don't think they'll have the same opportunities as I did and these other guys. I don't think that they'll become, well, I don't want to say that I'm a legend, but certainly the guys who I grew up listening to and ended up working with, people like, Kenny Everett and Simon Bates and Kid Jensen, these people who I went on to work with and all became my friends. These guys to me are radio legends, and the guys today won't have that opportunity because the young guys today have so much else going on in the listener's world with, the internet and the smartphone and Facebook and Instagram and et cetera, whereas people who listened to us on the radio and stood outside Capital Radio in London when we were on the air, and, Chris Tarrant would come downstairs and there'd be a ton of people outside waiting for him every morning. It would be because they were happy with a hoop and a stick and there was not a lot else going on. We were their entertainment. We could say listen Monday morning, 8:15. We'll play the new song by Kylie Minogue, and 4.5 million people would tune in to hear that. Whereas now people will say, "Yeah, I've already got that, mate. Downloaded it for free last week." So.
That's it. I mean, the choice is amazing. Having all that choice is amazing. But yeah, you're right that when Radio 1 in particular in the UK was so big, wasn't it? It was like the only place really that you could get pop music and chart music and beyond, of course, people doing other kinds of music. But what was your first radio gig? I mean, one of the most difficult things when you're trying to break into radio is A, getting a chance, and maybe just wangling your way in the door somewhere, or B, making the demo tape, because you're always very self-critical. I think you get used to the sound of your own voice as you grow up, but when you're doing it for the first time, trying to get the links right and everything else can be a little bit trying. So how did you come about your first radio gig?
Well, this is where anyone listening is going to actually say, wow, you're a lucky guy, because my first radio gig was on the aforementioned BBC Radio 1, and I covered Steve Wright in the afternoon.
Wow.
And I'd never been on the radio. I hadn't even done hospital radio, and my first show was sandwiched between Dave Lee Travis and Peter Powell, covering Steve Wright while he was on holiday for a week, and I was 20 years old. So I would say right place, right time, and it's been all downhill from there.
How nerve-wracking was that, though?
It was a bit nerve-wracking, but the funny thing about it is that being a Londoner, I aspired to being on Capital Radio, which is obviously the station that I listened to, compared to Radio 1, which wasn't all that big in London at the time and still really isn't. So in a way, when my agent said to me, I'd only been with him 4 or 5 months, and he got my demo tape to the boss at Radio 1 and managed to convince the boss at Radio 1, Derek Chinnery, to give me a shot and get on the air. And when he told me that I was going to be on that week, and it was next week or the week after, I had 2 weeks to get ready, I went, oh, okay, that's good. He goes, good, it's bloody amazing. What's wrong with you? It's the most incredible thing. And I went, well, I'd rather be on Capital. And he went, don't be so stupid. What are you talking about either? But, I took it and grabbed it and tried my best and did a week. And when the week finished, they said, thank you very much, but we don't have any jobs, and see you later. So I went, oh, that was a quick career. I started right at the top and then finished. But Radio Luxembourg then picked me up a couple of months later and got me out to the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, where I did a couple of weeks' worth of shows there and was on every day for a couple of weeks, or every evening, because it was a nighttime station. And from there, I think it was about my 10th day on the air at Radio Luxembourg, the agent guy gave me a call back. Well, my agent, Michael, gave me a call back and said, I've got you on Radio 1 full-time. You're going to get your own show. And that's when I joined full-time with Gary Davis and Janice Long as 3 new Radio 1 DJs. I
mean, Radio Luxembourg, you've reminded me of, I'd kind of forgotten all about it, but it was a big thing, wasn't it?
Radio it's Luxembourg. Big in Europe.
Yeah.
It's huge, yeah. Right across Europe it could be heard. And, people were listening all over Europe, not just in England, to the British service. There was various services coming out of this building, the RTL building in Luxembourg. You actually went there and lived in Luxembourg and waited for your show each night, and walked past the guy doing the Belgium service, and then past the guy doing the German service, and into the French one, and then past that into the English one, and so on and so forth. There were tons of different stations, all broadcasting in different languages, but they were all part of RTL, which was Radio Tele Luxembourg, and it was a pretty big fish back then on 208, the great 208.
Great 208. Wow, yeah. Wow. I'd forgotten all about that until you mentioned it. So you go back to Radio 1. Are you doing weekdays or weekends, or how did that start?
No. I went back to one show. I mean, it's my own show. We all got one show each, the 3 new DJs. So they had Janice early Saturday evening from 7, I think, and then Gary from 10 Saturday evening, and me Sunday morning at 6 a.m. doing the early breakfast show before Tony Blackburn. So, it was fine. It was good. And on Radio 1 in those days, when there wasn't a million other radio stations and there was no internet, it had a surprising amount of listeners. So, all the farmers and the nurses and anybody who was up early on a Sunday morning was there and listening. So it was good. When you think back to those times, there literally was the BBC and some BBC local radio and a sprinkling of commercial radio stations that had begun, but there wasn't anything like there is now, and people swanning around on their phone listening to, Z100 in New York just by clicking a button. It was nothing like that. You listened to the stations that were available, and there weren't many of them, so you had good potential for grabbing a bit of an audience whenever you were on, whatever time of the day.
Sure. 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning is a challenging time.
Yeah, you're not even back in yet, are you?
Well, that's it. And I did breakfast radio for the best part of a year here, and it I was doing it 5 days a week, so it completely messed my brain up because you're up at ridiculous times of the morning. But it is kind of it's a fun show to do, the breakfast show. As a rule, I think it sort of lends itself to that kind of lightheartedness, but it's a challenge. It's fair to say.
Absolutely, you're right. I mean, I didn't do breakfast. I was doing early breakfast, so I was warm up for Tony Blackburn on a Sunday morning, and I used to hand over to Tony and say, "Come on, Tony, you're on next, and make sure you do a fabulous, sensational show." And he would say to me, "Oh, good morning, Pat. Is that you or is that me?" It's kind of hard to tell, but we used to have some fun. And Tony remains a good friend of mine to this day. He only lives a couple of miles away, so I've been very lucky and blessed, as I say, to work with all the aforementioned legends of radio and who are still going strong today.
Sure. So how long did you stay at the BBC before you went to Capital Radio?
Yeah, I was about 9 months doing that show, so three-month contracts. And then I think what they wanted to do was to give that show at that time slot to other new DJs and try them out. So, I did okay. I hosted Top of the Pops while it was on the show because I was obviously a Radio 1 DJ at the time.
How cool! How cool was that? Your first foray into television, and just to put it in context for some of the listeners who might not be aware of just how big Top of the Pops was, what an institution it was. Every Thursday on the BBC, it was the top 40 show. You ran down the charts, you played, the videos, and there were people in studio. But it was, the pop music event of the week again, because there wasn't MTV or anything like that. But it, as a show, it's sort of embedded in the culture of people of a certain age.
Yes, it really was for more than 40 years, and I was probably starting out at a similar time doing the Sky Channel shows, which you would have seen in Ireland. So they were probably crossing over. That's when I got the job, really. I think I got the job on Sky because they auditioned a number of Radio 1 DJs to become VJs. So a disc jockey became a video jockey. So it would have coincided with me doing Top of the Pops and being on Radio 1 in 1982 and 1983 that I ended up, presenting on Sky and doing pop videos. But, being on Top of the Pops was a completely different audience. I was reaching probably millions of people seeing that on a Thursday night. People would look at you the next day as if you were an alien going, "Oh my gosh, the bloke from the telly." Whereas now almost everybody's on TV and no one bats an eyelid because there's 5,000 channels and the public are famous. But, even if you don't want to be a presenter, you can still be on the telly. So, it was done. And I moved from Radio 1 when that contract finished, and I went to Radio Mercury in Surrey and Sussex and kind of did what I should have done before I was at Radio 1, which was learning my trade, being on 5 days a week on a local radio station. And I enjoyed that, and it gave me a lot of experience that I didn't have when I started on the national brand. And so I kind of did things the wrong way round, really. Yeah. And eventually went from there to Chiltern Radio, and then from Chiltern Radio I was headhunted by Capital Radio and went there in 1987 with a load of new guys like Pete Tong and Tim Westwood and Foxy and a number of other people. So we were the new Capital DJs in 1987 who went on to be the most successful ones as such, because we were part of the station when it was at its most successful over the next 10 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, can you sort of outline just how successful Capital Radio was at that time? Because, I obviously know of it, but as somebody who wasn't living in London, it's difficult for me. I know it was very popular, but it's difficult for me to sort of put it in context. So if you come at me like I'm an ignoramus, it was really big.
Well, you've got it right. You're far from an ignoramus, because it was absolutely huge. It was vast. It was enormous. Every single Londoner was driving a car or going for a run or at a market stall had it on. I mean, we can't say that we were the best. It's just that we were up against not as many radio stations as there are these days. So therefore, we were kind of the only choice, really, for Londoners. And because we were the only choice and we did it well, and we were this hot, rocking, flame-throwing, new-sounding radio station, giving it a shot. And this new program director they brought in, Richard Park, had this sort of big sound for London and bought these big jingles and made it sound amazing. And we were just loving the chance to be DJs, which nowadays, they're not really around, are they? Everybody's, if they're any good as a presenter, they're people who are talking to people, not at them. So, but then we were disc jockeys. We were on the air saying, 10 songs in a row from the top of the tower, bashing out the fine tunage, and people were sort of thinking, wow, what are all these new words? What does it mean? But it's great, and I'll play along. And we would tell people to come along to one of our sort of events, a summer party or whatever, and you'd have 100,000 people turn up to see us introduce a few pop bands. It was amazing, and everybody had a T-shirt, and everybody stood outside and wrote our names on the pavements in marker pens. Camden Council even made Capital pay to have the pavements cleaned because they were it was extraordinary times.
Yeah, it sounds it. I mean, it just sometimes a station can just capture the imagination of the public at right place, right time, like you can be as a presenter. But it can happen for the station as well.
It did. It was very much the station. People loved Capital Radio, and I'm sure that 15-year-old kids today love Capital the same way that they did, but perhaps, they share it with their Instagram posts and everything else they have in their lives, so it's a different time. But then people were happy with a hoop and a stick, and we were the hoop and the stick, and they loved it, and it was a good time to be around, and so good to be on a station with lots of people who were legendary and I'd grown up with. I worked and covered Kenny Everett's show on Capital Radio. I worked with him and covered his show, whereas my memory before that of Kenny Everett is being a 13, 14-year-old kid trying to get through to his show and answer a competition. So to be on the air and him being my colleague, and then them asking me to cover his show when he was off on holiday was quite an accolade. Yeah,
I mean, another huge personality in the 70s and 80s. But you must have been extraordinarily busy if you're doing Capital Radio. You're also doing your TV for Sky, and I have to admit that the Funhouse, wasn't really aimed at my age bracket, but that was a thing which was, a really, really big TV show that ran for many years as well. So all of this going on at the same time, you must have been just up to your eyes.
Absolutely, that's right. And I had all my gigs as well. I was a real jobbing DJ. Ironically, not as much as I am now. That's what I say now because I'm talking to you during COVID-19. I'm not jobbing DJ doing live gigs at all. But up until now, I've had 74 live PAs and presentation festivals, whatever you want to call them. I've had them cancelled for this year from the beginning of March or early March when it all went crazy until November. So that's a lot of gigs cancelled or postponed until next year. So, but back then I was doing a ton of gigs as well as doing Funhouse, as well as doing this and that and Capital and everything else. I mean, when I went to do Funhouse, I would take 1 week off and I would go to Scotland, take a week off my radio show and record a whole series of Funhouse in 7 days. 2 a day, 2 times 7 is 14. 14 weeks is 3.5 months. That was the series done.
Right.
And I'd come back after my week's holiday. That wasn't a holiday because I was working 18-hour days in Glasgow at Scottish Television recording Funhouse, and I'd come back and go straight on the air again. And people would say, "Oh, Lee, you don't look very tanned. Where did you go?" I went, "Oh, I went to Glasgow." And they went, "Oh, that's why you're not tanned." But I was stuck inside a studio, whatever the weather, and it was unique times. But I never stopped working, and I never turned anything down. And I think that's quite important because you never know when something great is going to finish.
Well, that's true. Or as the things at the moment show, you just don't know what might happen that puts an end to the work that you think you're going to have.
Like now.
Yeah, I know. So, I mean, doing live events and live DJing things, what age were you when you started that? Because, I have some pretty horrendous memories of mobile discos and mobile DJing and waiting for equipment to turn up and doing like 80th birthday parties and doing 21sts and weddings and things like that, where, you know, there's one half of the room wants you to play all the latest pop music, and then there's somebody who's 76 over the other side of the room who's giving out because you're not playing any of the Beatles, or it's too loud, one or the other. I mean, my mobile disco DJing days, I don't look back on with a great deal of fondness, to be honest. I like doing nightclubs, but those kind of things always gave me nightmares. But, you know, do you have experiences in that realm as well?
Yeah, I had a mobile disco before I got into radio, absolutely.
Wow.
When I was about 16, 17, it was called Hit Connection. And we spelled connection, CONNEXION, just trying to be trendy, you see. Yeah. And we put it in a shatter typeface, and it all looked very good on our business cards. And yeah, we did okay. And in the end, I bought the other guy out because he wasn't as keen on me and investing each weekend's profit into new equipment, which I wanted to do to make it bigger and better. But like you, I had the same problems. I can remember soldering some bulging light bulb into a unit whilst we were playing because it had blown up. So we always took our soldering iron, and we soldiered on with our soldering iron, and that was okay. But my gigs are amazing, the ones I do to this day. You know, I play in front of huge crowds.
Yeah.
I mean, I've played the O2 and Wembley Arena and all the big venues with lots of different acts and many festivals, and in front of tens of thousands of people, and Jersey Weekender and Let's Rock festivals, and so many. I'm just blessed. I probably play to more than, probably more than 300,000-400,000 people every summer.
That's incredible. I mean, I look at your Instagram, and all of a sudden there's a picture of you with this massive crowd in some massive nightclub or thing somewhere around the world, you know, and I guess people might think that, you know, DJs or radio presenters have a certain lifespan, and once you sort of grow out of, let's say, being a chart DJ, you've got to sort of move quietly into the background and sort of grow old gracefully. But, you know, that doesn't appear to be what you're doing. And these gigs, I mean, are a lot of them based around sort of 80s, 90s music? Because, you know, certainly there've been a bit of a revival in terms of 80s acts and 90s acts, 80s in particular, you know, sort of coming together and doing these tours and what have you. So there's a big audience there for that kind of stuff.
Well, one, I've never been busier, so I feel very blessed. And two, I shouldn't blow my own trumpet, because it is all of it, all my work that I do is based on retro. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've even just done, as we speak this week, I've done a load of links introducing 80s and 90s pop videos for retro drive-in movies in Ireland.
Oh, wow.
And I'm going to be on the big screen in Ireland. I think it's going to be starting next week. I think they're open for business and saying that it's a really good, safe way for you to have some entertainment. You come out in your car, you buy your ticket online before you come, and then you turn up in your car, your windows are shut, you watch the movie or the video show, the video shows that I've done, and safe environment, isn't it, for actually going out for the evening?
I didn't even know that was a thing. And
retro drive-in movies.ie.
There it is.
There you go.
There
I've
it is.
Done it now for Ireland, so there's a good connection for you.
Various race courses and what have you. The car parks of race courses across the country. Wow, that's cool. I didn't even know that was a thing. So
yeah, we don't have it here, but certainly in Ireland, apparently these guys have been going for quite a while. So they asked me to do that. So that's purely, they asked me to do the 80s and the 90s. So I've done 10 videos for each, and it's purely based on nostalgia and on the past, as indeed is pretty much my career.
Well, it's no bad thing. No bad thing. Yeah. Once you don't have to get Ronnie to go run get the videos for this thing, that's true. Yeah. But nostalgia, Andrew, nostalgia is rife, and it's so popular. And when we do the Let's Rock festivals, people turn up with their kids, and they bring their 8-9-year-old kid, and you know, put some adamant paint across their face and put the kids on their shoulders, and suddenly you've got a kid who's dancing to Prince Charming and Goody Two-Shoes, even though, you know, they were born 35 years after the songs were hits. Yeah. So it's timeless, and the retro events, especially the 80s, are just huge. They're just so popular, and tens of thousands of people will come for a day out to celebrate
the good times that they remember. I mean, the radio station I work for now, Greatest Hits Radio, their strapline, we play the best songs for the 70s, 80s and 90s, and the strapline for the radio station is Greatest Hits Radio, the good times sound like this.
Right.
And it sums things up. Our voiceover who says that, the station voice is Dawn French.
Oh,
so it's
okay.
a voice that everybody knows, and people feel, even if they don't know it's her, they feel comfortable with her voice because she's on there going, the good times sound like this.
Yeah.
And you just feel at home with that voice, and it's something you know in the back of your mind, and that's what it is. Every time you hear a song, you go, I love this. Oh, I bought that. Oh, I remember what I was doing when I heard that first. So nostalgia, you just can't beat it. It's just hugely popular for live gigs and for the radio station, which is now making a real grasp on the ratings as well.
All right. Well, one of the other reasons we were going to talk is because you are an Arsenal fan. You've been an Arsenal fan your whole life. I know there's no football at the moment, but how are you feeling about what's going on with Mikel Arteta? Are you encouraged by what he was doing before everything shut down?
I was going to say, I can hardly remember. It's been so long. But all I can remember is that Arteta did contract coronavirus, didn't he? Which was really the first sort of famous, well-known person that anybody had heard about. So Arsenal were right up there, up front with the virus before anybody else. And they were the first game to cancel, weren't they? To put a game off in the league as well. Yeah. So, it seems an awfully long time ago. But I've also heard that they've now resumed training in a safe capacity as well. So that's a good sign.
Is football something you get a great deal of time to enjoy? Because if you're gigging and you're traveling and you're doing gigs all over the place, it must be difficult to find time to get to games or even watch the games, depending on time zones and what have you.
Still enjoy it, yes. Sometimes I have to miss out, obviously, because I might be on a plane or something, because a lot of my work does involve travelling, as you say. Had a season ticket up until a couple of years ago, and I think this is the second season where I haven't had a season ticket, mainly because I just did get too busy and found that I wasn't utilising the ticket well enough, and couldn't often find somebody who was able to go either, and I thought an empty seat wasn't an ideal thing, and also a bit of a waste of money if you're not going. So I gave it up the season before this one, and I might try and pick another one up another time when I get a bit older and I get a bit less busy. But for the moment, no, I'm not a season ticket holder, but I do love to watch them on TV nevertheless if I'm around. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I chat back and forth with Nicky, your son, who's very passionate, it's fair to say.
He's very passionate, my son. You need to jump on his Twitter. It's certainly an interesting experience.
Yes, yeah, it is. It is. So look, one final thing before we go. I believe there is a book coming out in October.
Yes.
What can you tell me about that?
Well, we decided a couple of years ago, it's actually a guy who Nicky knows very well. When I used to take Nicky to school on a rota, so, one day one parent would take 3 kids and 4 kids or whatever, and another day someone would take the same kids to the same school, from the same area as such. And the guy who used to go there, a guy called Darren, he was very quiet in the car, never used to say very much at all. And Nicky would be quite noisy, and my other son Daniel would as well, and they all went to the same school. And then literally, after not hearing from Darren for many years, he contacted me, now that he's in his 30s and got a couple of kids, and said that Funhouse was always his favourite programme growing up. And he was always a bit in awe of the fact that the guy who did the Funhouse was driving him to school. So that's why he never spoke and said anything. I used to think he was just a bit rude, sitting in the back, not saying thank you for the lift. But it turns out that he was a very creative guy and had become a journalist for The Independent and various other newspapers. And he asked me if he could write a book that was kind of a spoof on me, so a sideline swipe at my life, which mentions Radio 1 and mentions Funhouse and all the other things I've done, but not necessarily strictly true. Or is it? People will have to make their own mind up when they read the book, but it's very amusing, and it does involve a number of things where I read it and went, wow, did I really do that? And wow, was I really involved with that? Because it's just very, very clever, and he's made it into, rather than being a a biography where he goes, I did this, then I lost that job, and then I did this, and it's a bit boring. He's made it into a fantastic story where I've got Terry Wogan's phone number, and I managed to keep calling him up, and he keeps giving me advice as to how I can get onto the radio. And then one day Steve Wright's taken ill, and I got the call, even though that's not actually how it happened. But it's a very amusing read. It's with a really good publisher, and it's out. Hopefully, I think October 20th it's come out, and we're using the name of the book as being a look back on my life, based on the phrase that we used in the kids show Funhouse in between every game, when we showed a clip of the game in slow motion for about 5 seconds. And I used to twirl around and say, let's rerun the fun. So that's what we're doing. We're rerunning the fun, looking back at everything I've had fun with over the last nearly 40 years. And the book will come out in October, and hopefully people will like it and embrace it for what it is, and they'll work out whether or not it's all true.
Yeah, they can decide amongst themselves which bits are fact, which bits are fiction. I'm sure, I'm sure it's all
fun.
It's all fun, exactly. All right, well, listen, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Pat Sharp, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Andrew. Thanks for having me on, and up the Arseblog.
Thank you. I do love a smooth radio voice. And that's what we got with the legend, Pat Sharp. Thank you very much indeed to him for taking the time and coming on the show. You can follow him on Twitter at Pat Sharp. That is at Pat Sharp. And thank you to Nikki for his help in setting that up. Right. I think I've talked enough for this week. I've got to save some shit for like all the rest of the weeks that we've got to go before football starts again. James and I will be here on Monday with an Arsecast Extra as always. In the meantime, have yourselves a fantastic weekend, whatever you get up to, and we will catch you on the next one. Until then, cheers. Bye-bye. Hi, I'm Stan Cranky, and this is a message for all our season ticket holders. You have a special place in our hearts because you are the most gooner-tastic of our fans. And we know that you're looking for refunds on tickets for games that won't be played. Sure, you could have the money and you could spend it on rent or groceries, but we here at KSE want to give you something more. We want to give you something special. So in lieu of cash refunds, I'm going to sing to you the collected works of Johnny Cash. I hurt myself today just because of love is a burning thing. Tell me now, baby, is it good to you? Does it go to the toilet sniffing glue? Uh-huh. I can take you higher. I fell into a ring of fire. No refunds.